In this video, we're going to talk about lighting in Maya. So we're going to see how we can create lights, how we can manage the lights and the lighting inside the scene that we have created so far. Now, we experimented with a lot of different types of modeling. We worked with NURBS and with polygonal modeling. So we created some objects and for example, we extruded a plan view for architecture. We created kind of a exterior wall for an apartment. We created some furniture, hard poly modeling and soft poly modeling. So we are finished now with the part concerning the modeling and the creation of objects. We're going to see something about the lighting, and later on also we will use materials and set up the materials and mapping and so on for these objects that we created. Now, sometimes the mapping could be really hard, especially if you do that on characters, but we're gonna explain that later. Now we're just gonna start this other part, which is also available in other software and in render engine. So if you use, for example, V-Ray, then you should use V-Ray lighting system and V-Ray lights, materials, and so on. So first of all, we saw the ambient occlusion effect. You can also activate it and deactivate it there or in the viewport options. In the viewport options, you have many different options that can improve or decrease the quality of your viewport. Now you have also the lights turned on there and the shadows and also motion blur, but this is for animation, so we don't care it at the moment. And so you have a series of switches up there that you can turn on and off. Now, if you turn on lights, well, it happens the opposite. The lights get turned off. That's because we are using a default light. We don't have actual lights inside the scene right now. So we need to place them in order to start to work and create a lighting system. So I want to create something in the scene here to test the lights. And what you see here right now is just the ambient occlusion. So we are not actually seeing shadows because there are no lights. So lights and shadows, they come together. They have to be considered together, especially if you do exterior rendering for architecture. You want to see those shadows. You want to study the position of the sun and the exposure and the shadows. So let's turn on the lights and we cannot see anything except the image references that we use for the character design and the apartment design or architecture. And again, this is because we are using default and we don't have any light. So if we go to panels and options, viewport options, we can also set up the number of lights, so light limit, and we can disable the ambient occlusion and add some extra effects here and fix a little bit the ambient occlusion. I leave the ambient occlusion on because it's a pretty realistic effect. In reality, ambient occlusion, it's visible and it's also representing kind of a dirt that you have in the scene, so it's pretty realistic. Now, if you go to the lighting menu, you can see that you can use all lights, press 7 key on the keyboard, or you can use the selected lights. Again, we don't have any lights right now. Or you can use the flat lighting. And here only the ambient occlusion is visible. And we can use this, for example, for materials and textures. And then we have use no lights. So everything's black. We can also use two-sided lighting when we use default lighting, which is a little bit better than the one-sided lighting. So you can have that turned on and use the default light until you actually going to use the lights here. And so we're gonna use the lights. And let's go here to show and make sure that lights it's on. And we don't want to use the images references right now, so we are going to turn them off from the show menu. And let's go to create and go to lights. And let's undock this menu here. Here we have we can go in the shading menu up there. So the shading ribbon or top toolbar where we can create cameras, can create lights, can create materials and preview rendering and animations, and also textures and UVs and mapping, well, and also painting. But we're gonna see those things later on after we explain a little bit about the lighting. So I'm gonna start with the first one, which is an ambient light. Now this is pretty close to what we have, which is the default lighting or flat lighting. You can see it's a really soft and generic lighting that is gonna light up the scene with a simple color, and that's the icon there. You can move it anywhere. This is not to be positioned in somewhere in particular. You can position that anywhere. The effect will stay the same, and the shadows also that this light produces gonna be kind of a soft shadows and really, well, not focused, because this is not a focused light, it's a ambient light. The next one, directional, it's extremely focused. So you can use this to create, for example, the sunlight or like a laser beam, so something really concentrated. This is a light that it's pointing in one direction only, and it's shooting photons, it's emitting its lights, photons, and shooting them all in one direction, parallel direction. And I can rotate this light. So I will use the rotate tool, or I can use the hotbox or the parameters. You can rotate it and you can see where it's coming from. You can see the light coming through the openings inside our architecture here, which is kind of an open architecture right now, kind of an exterior setup, but you get the idea. So this is where the shadows start to become pretty important. And this is where you can try to test here with the lights on and off and the shadows on and off in the viewport to see the difference. You can definitely see here that these are not generic and soft shadows like the ambient occlusion or the ambient light shadows, but these are really neat, are really you see there that you can definitely see the edges of those shadows. Now you can use both the ambient light as a skylight and the directional as a sunlight. So if you want to set up an exterior rendering, you can use ambient and directional. These two can be used as natural lights for exteriors and for interiors. If you are an interior, you can make the sun get inside the scene and then use that as a natural light for interiors. Now I'm just gonna anticipate you that in Maya Light version, you don't have let's say advanced rendering system, so you need to switch later to another one, and I will talk about that later. So let's create here area light, spotlight, and point light. These are the other three, which could be considered artificial lights. And so point light is something that it's also called Omni. It's pointing in every direction. And spotlight, it's like a cone of light, and then we have the area light, which is shooting from an area, not from a single point. And these are all the lights that we can get. And again, the lighting, it's pretty simple here in Maya Light. If you want to do something more advanced, you should move into V-Ray or maybe Lumion or Twinmotion or other software that can be useful to create really nice animated and rendered scenes. But we're gonna talk about what you can do here. And again, this is something pretty generic. So if you learn the basics here, you can then use these notions, use this knowledge in other software, in other render engine, because the basic is the same. Now you always need to work